This is episode 152 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico podcast. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Happy Thanksgiving, post-Thanksgiving, everybody. And what a unique holiday we had with all the snow, record-setting snow, and I was able to get out with the family for that particular day, do some sledding there on the west side of Albuquerque, even made the Channel 4 KOB news, just with the kids and whatnot. A lot of folks were out there enjoying the day off, the Thanksgiving holiday, and the very nice snowfall we had, which of course was all gone by the next day after we had a combination of higher temperatures and rain.
Well, it's nice we have snow. I have a feeling this could be a good ski year for New Mexico. I was out of town the last few years, Paul. Most of the time when it snows in Albuquerque, I'm not here. So maybe I'm good luck for the ski industry that I should leave town more often.
No doubt about it. Someone else who's leaving town. And
speaking of leaving town,
yes.
Well, he could stay, but I doubt if he will.
That is true. He might go back to being an announcer for the national college football broadcasts. I'm talking, of course, of Bob Davie, the one-time, I believe it was NBC broadcast host for college football. Of course, coached Notre Dame, and I don't know that he knew what he was getting into when he came to New Mexico and took the reins of the UNM Lobos. Of course, they're writing some very nice checks to him, and we will be writing another nice check to him for his 2 remaining years that would have been on his contract. Was he not? I don't know. With these things, you never know, Wally. Is it the decision of the coach or is the decision of the school? They are parting ways, and we, the people, ultimately, because nothing happens at UNM without a healthy infusion of tax money, $850,000 will make their way from the UNM athletic department to Bob Davie's pocket. And of course, when they hire a new coach, we'll be paying him as well. So that is the beat going on in the land of enchantment when it comes to our sports athletics coaches.
Yeah, a tough run for Mr. Davie. Never really had the fantastic year ever. I mean, had a couple of fair years, but I guess you could say his career was better than the coach he replaced, Loxley, who had an even worse time and had even more problems of an off-the-field nature as much as on the field. But yes, let's... we can only hope. Hope springs eternal with regard to the success of Lobo football going forward. And it's interesting. You're one of the few people, Paul, that from time to time say, is this what we really ought to be doing? Is there a better way to go? There is no law in this great country of ours that you need to have a Division I football program at a place like UNM or New Mexico State, for that matter. It is a choice, and as it's turning out to be a pretty unsuccessful and oftentimes expensive choice. So whatever happens, we know there's going to be a lot, big numbers, a lot of dollars associated with it.
Yeah, and we talked about even on the upcoming podcast that'll be out on Thursday with Jeff Apodaca, former governor candidate, former Lobo football player, talking about the issues at UNM football. Now, he is inclined to spend more money and try to make this whole football thing work at UNM. But I've seen more sports speak up, and I can't recommend them as the bastion of all wisdom in our community. But in the Albuquerque Journal, you can write in kind of the abbreviated letter to the editor. If your keyboard just flutters away, you can probably get it published in the Sports Speak Up section of the Albuquerque Journal. It's not always the most well thought out stuff, but a handful of people writing in have said, is this really what we want UNM to continue doing is pouring money into this football program, which we're never going to be Alabama. I don't think we're ever going to be, University of Missouri or University of Arkansas in New Mexico. Should we consider taking a different direction here, maybe to the extent we're focused on athletics, use the the basketball program as the athletic program of note in New Mexico at the university, and working to get that into the Sweet 16 and beyond. I can't say that there's going to be that shift. We've seen zero inclination towards fiscal restraint out of Santa Fe, given the oil and gas money flowing in here. But I don't think we're going to get a new coach who is going to be the miracle worker. There are substantial social, cultural, population, economic issues that are going to need to be addressed or solved in order to make UNM or NMSU, for that matter, successful on the football field.
Yeah, and then the other thing is, if you get a relatively young, up-and-coming coach to come to a place like UNM and they have a great, fantastic year or two, they're almost always lured away. So you have that factor as well. So you certainly want success, but it's almost self-limiting in some ways if you get that great young coach. Now, if you get a coach that's doing a great job late in his career, that might be the place for him to retire. Maybe that's not the case, but that's something you have to look at as well. And there's a history in UNM football coaches that have had a year or two of relative success at UNM during their tenure and then leave to go on and do great things elsewhere. So that's also something to look at in this calculus. That is this major business of college football associated with the university system.
Yeah, if we were dealing with an economically rational actor here, which we're not, but I could just see UNM abdicating, selling off the football stadium to the New Mexico United, maybe reworking a few aspects of that particular stadium to make it 100% soccer friendly. And boy, what a nice asset for our city. But of course, heaven forbid that we had a minor league soccer team that shared a stadium with another going concern or whatever, or took over a stadium like that. It's too much bureaucracy, too much lack of care about dollars and cents, especially coming from UNM, but also I'm sure the New Mexico United are going to do whatever the league wants them to do. And why would they want to take a secondhand football stadium when the city of Albuquerque and state of New Mexico are likely to line up and just provide another taxpayer finance facility? But anyway, we'll see how all this goes. But yeah, another tough season for both of New Mexico's football teams. And speaking of tough, City of Albuquerque at one time had said that the crime in the city was going to drop and was dropping dramatically. We had all this wonderful data that they had produced, and it turns out that a lot of that data was just flat out inaccurate. So this is all, what I'm saying here based on a story from the Albuquerque Journal. Elise Kaplan, it was put out December 1st, Sunday, December 1st. Flaws discovered in APD crime statistics. And without going into all the details, the first part of 2019 data, so January to July from 2019, it was looking like where we were seeing some dramatic reductions in crime in the Duke City, whether it was auto theft, commercial burglary, residential burglary, homicide, rape, robbery, aggravated assault. All those things were said to be declining dramatically. We're now seeing data indicating that decline, to the extent there was a decline, was minimal, if at all. Wally, crime has bedeviled Albuquerque for, I think, as long as it's been a city, but certainly for either of our lifetimes, it's been a long time issue that's certainly taken on a life of its own in the last few years, spanning both Keller and the Barry administrations. What do you think about this whole situation?
Well, the crime situation as a whole, where do you start? But just to address the statistical issue, there's this whole trend to things like crime. We want to use data-based approaches. So we want to use data to fight crime. What's the most effective things that we can do to fight crime, to make our cities safer? And that's been the approach that's been, what's kind of been preached here in Albuquerque by many people. But then to find out that the data underlying that has the huge problems that they have, I just think it calls into the question that whole concept. Is that, okay, how good of data analysis can you do if you don't have good data and don't have good tools to manage it? I was just thinking as I read the Albuquerque Journal article about the problems they have, and we have old software and this, that, and the other. It's like, we live in the data age, and there is software out there. There are systems out there. They're not always super inexpensive. They're not always super easy to do. But if that's the core of our strategy, what does that say about, bureaucratic ineptitude when supposedly we're using that as the underlying basis by which to make policy decisions, out there in the mean streets of Albuquerque, as it were?
Yeah, and I don't know what exactly happened at the Keller administration. I like to think that this was mere incompetence. I question whether it might have been something else. However,
and you would have to say that from Keller's point of view, he came clean on this. So it's one of those that would have. Now, did somebody lower down, hide some things for political? Who knows? We don't know, and I'm certainly making no accusations.
No,
but I do think, kudos to him to come clean on something that's super uncomfortable to do. That's like, horrible for his administration, and the fact that he was able to do that, and in a fairly straightforward, approach, that is good. It's like, okay, now we realize we have a problem. Let's go to work on solving it. But again, it's the 1-2 punch of, okay, let's get the data so that we know how the scorekeeping's going, but what are the policies and what are we doing out there in the streets, in the courts, in the district attorney's office with regard to bail policy, all the things that impact crime in Albuquerque to hopefully make it better.
Yeah, now there's actually an analogous situation. It's something we encounter in education policy. In the Rio Grande Foundation, we dabble in criminal justice reform issues on a case-by-case basis. We're not experts on crime or crime reduction, although it's a very important aspect of the challenges facing the state and local economies. But this article from the Journal says that in February, so going back to February, we're in December now, folks, APD reported different numbers from what the city had originally reported to the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting Program. And the analogous situation is that frequently you will have state policymakers or district policymakers at APS or at the Department of Education statewide, not just here in New Mexico, but across the country, touting their reforms, their policies are successful at the state and local level. And then when you actually look at the data on the national level, where they really compare apples to apples, in this case, it's the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting Program. You can go onto their website and find data from cities and states all over the country. You'll see that the alleged policy successes are not nearly what are being touted by the political leaders, whether it's the districts in New Mexico, school districts, or in this case, the mayor. So according to the FBI Crime Data Explorer in its annual report, and I guess this is data from February that was somehow ignored or not reported in the same way, aggravated assault increased 21% rather than decreasing 8% as announced. Rapes increased 3% rather than decreasing 3%. Auto theft did decrease by 14%, not the 31% reported. And then homicides remained basically the same. And robbery did decrease by 32%, which isn't far off from the originally reported 36%. And as the journal notes, all these numbers in general are much higher than the national average. New Mexico's always had a high crime situation. It's always been a high crime state. And the city of Albuquerque in particular has had serious issues with crime. And of course, a lot of the critics of the mayor, including yours truly, would say, why are we focused on sick leave mandates or plastic bag bans? Or last week we just talked about this closed captioning issue that they're mandating.
$500 fines for not having closed captioning on in a restaurant.
And I know that government officials can do multiple different things, but we also like to see the real problems being taken on head on, whereas I don't think the city of Albuquerque is truly addressing, and the Keller administration is truly addressing the crime issues. I'm not saying there's any easy solutions, but invest yourself in fighting back against the crime and the problems facing our city. Don't get all over the place with these other ancillary issues, which are either going to harm net the economy and your ability to deal with these issues, or are just total irrelevant red herring. So, interesting stuff there, Wally. Any final thought?
Well, as you look at the crime statistics that they are keeping track of, unlike a lot of things when it comes to public policy, there's a lot of definitional requirements and there's a lot of subtleties in that. Most of these, I don't think that is the issue. This seems like it's some sort of basic bookkeeping, basic accounting, basic data collection. If auto theft, for example, that is pretty easy. Did someone steal your car or didn't they? Obviously, not to belittle homicide, but homicide was somebody charged with killing another human being. That's homicide. So I don't believe they have those problems. The final thought I had is as I talk about from time to time, I'm blessed with a background in accounting. And as we always used to say, is that when accounting goes well, the kudos do not flow. But when the accounting goes poorly, all heck breaks loose. And in this case, that's what's happened at the city of Albuquerque with regard to their crime statistics.
Very true. So we are going to do now a little bit, because, we're talking right after a holiday week. We all enjoyed our time off, and thankfully there were not too many big public policy issues during that time frame. Of course, it's important to note that the ART did officially get going on November the 30th, so we're just days in. Right now, bus trips are free running up and down Central. On my way over here to do this podcast, Wally, I saw a couple of the buses, and they are very turquoise. The most notable thing, though, is that as far as I could tell, the windows to look into the bus are not, you're not able to see into the bus, at least during the daylight hours. I haven't seen them operating in the nighttime yet to see if you can see in, because the rapid ride buses particularly, but I think all the buses, you could see through the windows into them and see just how few people were actually on board the buses. Now, at this time, we're in this honeymoon phase, of course, free trips. People want to check out this new bus. The city, of course, has a very strong incentive to maintain security and to have a established police presence to try to make sure that nothing bad happens during this so-called honeymoon period with the ART buses. By all means, go check it out. There's some great events going on around the holidays here in Albuquerque. I know my family's going to be over at Popejoy. We could easily take the bus over there, and May indeed, as well as the River of Lights, which is another great event, and the bus is able to be taken right there as well. Wally, do you have any plans to ride the ART buses?
I don't have imminent plans, but now that you say that, I feel like I've been sort of shamed into it. I need to do that. I live I live kind of towards the part of town that is Wantabo and Central area, so I don't even know how far it goes up. Coming here a couple times, I've gone on Central, like around Wyoming, San Mateo, San Pedro, up Central. I've yet to see a bus, so I need to find out where they are. But yeah, I think that's something that I'll put that on my short list of things to do over the holiday season. Just check it out, see what it's like, see what some of the issues are. It's a fantastic asset of the city. If by asset you mean something we spend a heck of a lot of money on. Now, whether it's going to work out or not, I don't know. But yeah, I think that's good. I think most people in New Mexico or in Albuquerque ought to do that too, if for no other reason than to see what works, see what doesn't, and have projects like this. There will be more that are brought up, and so if for no other reason, maybe the populace, the taxpayers, the voters, the citizens of our great city and state would maybe ask a little bit more insightful, tougher questions on other things like this in the future. And so it's, if nothing else, it's an interesting case study.
Yeah, or along the lines of the old Will Rogers joke about going to visit Washington, D.C., I like to see where my tax dollars are. This is, of course, yet another ill-advised use of local tax dollars and federal dollars as well. And you might as well get something out of it, especially when the rides are free. It's
nothing is so expensive as a free public transportation ride, though. So yes, so free meaning no more money out of our pockets, exactly. But certainly it's come from somewhere.
I'm old enough to remember when they did the same exact thing with the Rail Runner, and the first year ridership numbers were all off the charts, and everybody said, "Oh, this system's great. It's doing so well." And then, as reality hit in and people didn't actually use the train on a regular basis to go to their work or whatever, and the fare box revenue numbers came out down the line, we saw the reality. And I suspect that the ART honeymoon may not last beyond the very beginning of 2020. Mid-January in Albuquerque, we've seen some pretty cold weather here over Thanksgiving. January will likely not be much warmer, and sitting outside waiting for a city bus is not likely on many people's list, especially given relative lack of activities in this town, certainly up and down Central, come January. Well, it is getting towards the end of the year, Wally, and we're kind of in a dual purpose mode with this next topic, which is donor privacy. Rio Grande Foundation, and it's worth noting, if you're inclined towards donating to the Rio Grande Foundation, we encourage all listeners to do this. We're not getting a specific grant to do our podcast. We're doing this because we think it's an important way to reach out to the public, inform folks, whether it's policymakers or average citizens. We think that having this direct line to people and getting our ideas out there is a critical part of our mission. So we're a 501c3 organization. Donations to the Rio Grande Foundation are private. They are not public information. If you're worried about your liberal Bernie voting or Warren voting neighbors finding out that you're supporting the evil Rio Grande Foundation, your fears are unfounded. Federal law says that the IRS has repeatedly found donations to 501c3 groups like the Rio Grande Foundation are not only tax deductible, but they are private information. That being said, this is a constant battle that we're dealing with at the Rio Grande Foundation. Yes, Wally.
Yeah. So, bring your money in the boatloads, cash check, credit card, however. Yeah, this whole issue about donor privacy is a very, very interesting one. And in our increasingly divided political environment, it just seems like there's a lot of groups out there that really try to utilize things like campaign contributions, donations, etc., against the people that do those. Now, I would have to say that my perception is that is much more of a left compared to right, meaning the left employs that strategy much more. But wherever you are, there is it's interesting how these rights that we have sometimes when people disagree politically, they do some very funny things. And I think that who you give your money to from a charitable contribution, it makes sense to me that it's private. It's good that federal law backs that up, and just makes it that much easier to give to causes that you would like to give to. And by the way, political or unpolitical, there are charitable, extensively charitable organizations that do work that certainly I think it's good that they don't have to disclose their donors as well, not just politically, so it's one of those things that in the modern world with the internet, with communications, with databases, if something is public, it can be used for a lot of good, but it can be used for a lot of bad. And I think that's just, that is a good system of this deductible charitable contribution 501c3 organization that we've set up in our country. The fact that it is still confidential, I think, is a good thing. I think it's positive for the system.
And just to be clear, under the IRS law, donations to political candidates are regulated and they're made public. So that is a different issue. And some would say that that's not the right way to do things. I'm not really here to discuss or argue that. But what I will say is that the example that I think most powerfully illustrates why organizations like the Rio Grande Foundation or the Sierra Club or the National Cancer Society or the NAACP should be private information. Going back to 1956, when the Attorney General of Alabama brought a suit in state circuit court in Montgomery, Alabama, against the National Association for the Advancement of Color People for violating state statute requiring corporations, NAACP, Rio Grande Foundation were all corporations, regarding the privacy of those donors. The case was ultimately decided in the United States Supreme Court on June 30th, 1958, to back up the NAACP. And I don't think I need to paint too much of a picture for the average person to understand that the state of Alabama, circa 1956, was not looking to send out Christmas cards to donors to the NAACP. This is
or thank their donors. That was not what they were doing. They were using it. They were trying to use the government as a arm of retribution.
Yes, this is the heart of the Jim Crow South at a time when Jim Crow was still very much in effect. And yes, I realize that the Rio Grande Foundation's political opponents are not the state of Alabama or quite at the level of the Jim Crow South. However, you've seen news reports of Antifa and some of these left-wing protesters going after speakers on college campuses and threatening the lives and livelihoods of people that they disagree with. It is maybe not as systemic as the Jim Crow South in the 1950s, but it is very real. And I would say that overall, the trend line is not an encouraging one in terms of the level of violence and malevolence based on political donations to like-minded organizations. A gentleman who was a higher up at Mozilla, which is a very popular web browser. He had given some money to some conservative causes, and when he, I believe political candidates actually, not conservative causes, but he, those donations were disclosed, and it was basically used against him to blackball him from moving up at Mozilla, and so he wound up leaving the organization. Chick-fil-A, which is obviously a public company, there's been a lot of controversy on both sides of the issue now in terms of their political involvement, and every organization, if you're a public company, chances are those kinds of donations are indeed disclosed. But the issue of disclosure, the politics of disclosure, and who you give your money to is definitely something that folks are going to try to use against you. And I would point all the way back, even beyond the NAACP, to the Federalist Papers, which were written at the founding of our country. James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, debating the merits of adopting the United States Constitution or lack thereof. They all did that in a anonymous context, and I think there is a strong justification for individuals wishing to debate and discuss controversial political issues not entirely publicly. And yes, I realize that going onto web chat forums and comment sections on YouTube and other websites can be a harrowing experience. People can be very nasty and not bringing out the best of human nature in some of these anonymous forums. But the flip side is we need to protect individuals and their support for causes that may not be popular. Because after all, the First Amendment is exactly what it is, not because widely held positions, 80, 90% of the population supporting X, Y, and Z. That doesn't need to be defended. The sheer weight of the population will defend its political views. It's the so-called unpopular minority opinions. And in New Mexico, I would hazard to say, that adherence to free market, limited government, constitutional positions is not particularly popular among the dominant political class of New Mexico. And so that's a nice way of saying that we're all working in the same wavelength here at the Rio Grande Foundation. And I want to share a few things that we've actually done to preserve donor privacy. So, Wally, I know you had some thoughts there.
Oh yeah, as you're just talking, yes, the First Amendment is not about popular speech defense. It's about political speech. It's the right to speak out, and seems like that is increasingly under attack. It used to be, I don't like what you say, but I defend your right to say it was a much more common theme. That seems like in many institutions, particularly increasingly on college campuses, that does not seem to be the case, and in the larger society as a whole. So, that First Amendment is certainly I think it's certainly under attack broadly, and I don't think it's just from the left attacking. There's a lot of people, when they get empowered, do what they can to try to silence critics. That's one of the things that our form of government that the founding fathers set up to try to avoid those inherent abuses. And one of the reasons they put freedom of speech was the ability to call people out without fear of retribution from the government. So it's interesting. These are interesting times we live in. I don't think they're unprecedented. Like some people would say, there's been many periods of yellow journalism, newspapers being very advocacy oriented over the history of our country, if you go back and listen to history. But, all of these things coming to a fore again with our little friend, the internet, to be able to quickly and easily communicate and whip these issues up. It brings it's bringing a lot of interesting times to economic and political discussions in our country.
No doubt. And just to give you an understanding, while we don't talk about donor privacy and these issues very often, I quite honestly prefer to talk about the philosophical underpinnings of free markets and individual liberty, not the mechanics of donor privacy or what we're doing to defend donor privacy. But one of the most interesting battles we've been involved in involves the aftermath of the Santa Fe soda tax issue. The Rio Grande Foundation was successful in turning back Santa Fe Mayor Javier Gonzalez's plans for a very onerous soda tax. Out of that, Rio Grande Foundation wound up in violation of the city's $250 spending limit on a quote unquote readily identifiable ballot measure. So we had received in-kind contributions involving a website and a YouTube video that, I'll admit and clearly violated the $250 threshold. We wound up coming under attack from the city of Santa Fe on that. And thankfully, our friends at the Goldwater Institute, based in Arizona, stepped up with some legal representation, and we sued the city of Santa Fe in federal court. Case is still pending as to whether it is legal for the city of Santa Fe to have this kind of very, very low, minimal contribution limit. I mean, $250 on any readily identifiable ballot measure. You don't even have to say vote yes or vote no, as we did not. We just said soda taxes are kind of bad ideas. The use of this for an entirely new system of pre-K is a bad idea. It's not going to do anything about the problems that's supposedly going to try to remedy those issues. And we went to court over that. We're still waiting for a result, but I feel very confident in our likely success at the end. It's just a matter of federal judges getting moving on that particular issue, and we await a result. Now, we also fought against Maggie Toulouse Oliver, Secretary of State of New Mexico. She did adopt a campaign finance disclosure law via just her own fiat, just as the Secretary of State went through a regulatory process, took a tremendous amount of power in that process, and has adopted her own legal framework for campaign finance and regulating organizations like the Rio Grande Foundation. If we wanted to get involved in a policy issue, we would have to disclose our donors. It's a higher threshold than $250. Of course, it's a statewide threshold, so it's a lot more restrictive in terms of the surface area of the state of New Mexico. You need to spend a lot of money in order to make an impact on an issue statewide. Now, this was eventually passed into law through the appropriate legislative process, through the legislature here in 2019. Essentially, the legislature backfilled and adopted what the Secretary of State had done already. But we are in talks with a prominent nonprofit legal representative to also take on the Secretary of State and her regulations. So more to come on that. We failed, of course, to stop her from doing the administrative route, which extra constitutional, extra legal, we believe. And unfortunately, we didn't have any representation on that. When you deal with nonprofit legal representation, you work with them on their terms, not on your terms. Of course, it's not in the budget for us to take on full force the Secretary of State. And finally, we're doing battle with the City of Albuquerque. They have a similar to Santa Fe $250 limit. We don't believe we violated it in this particular election over democracy dollars, but we are involved in discussions to ensure that that is indeed the finding. These one of the many problems is that the commissions and the boards that are engaged in these issues are politically oriented. There are a lot of folks who get to those positions because of political connections and involvements, and they are more than willing to pick on somebody who is small and unpopular, but when it comes to, say, the mayor of Albuquerque and his campaign violations during the election when he got elected, and the fact that he was clearly coordinating between entities that shouldn't have been, or the fact that he, and we have a complaint on this, was using the City of Albuquerque's website to directly campaign on behalf of bond measures in the 2019 election. Those kinds of things tend not to be at the top of the list of these boards and commissions to go after. They go after somebody who they tend not to have as much blowback coming from politically or otherwise. So we expect we will be seen as free and clear on this issue, but we've got ongoing fights on donor privacy, defending your ability to donate to organizations like the Rio Grande Foundation, but hardly limited to the Rio Grande Foundation in the city of Santa Fe and in the state of New Mexico, that are both important parts of what the Rio Grande Foundation is all about.
Yeah, and it is interesting, the cumbersome nature of like the city of Santa Fe, city of Albuquerque, these special funds that need to be created, and all the accountings that needs to be done for very minimal amounts of dollars. And, I think it personally, conceptually borders on, violating freedom of association from Constitution of the United States. And it is interesting that the organizations that tend to run afoul of these are much more likely to be in the $250 range than these organizations that are in the $25,000 or $2.5 million range. It's one of those. So it's the, antithesis of, we want the political process to be open to all, but to put such a huge burden for an organization to spend $250, $500, $1,000 weighing in on a political issue like a ballot initiative is, strikes me as the antithesis of what these laws are intended to do, which was level the playing field. So it's the exact opposite.
You could make the case, and I've had this case made to me by attorneys who deal with this kind of issue on a regular basis, that these are almost as if they are for the purpose of making it difficult to impossible for average citizens to engage in these public policy debates. And I would say that, yes, $250 is getting pretty darn close to just the average concerned citizen. Say you have a zoning battle taking part in your neighborhood, or redistricting of the public school district boundaries, or some other issue, and you want to draw attention to it. Filing the paperwork and doing a measured finance committee was incredibly unattractive to us at the Rio Grande Foundation, just from a pure paperwork and process-oriented staff time, and dealing with those kinds of issues was very unattractive to us. Of course, the left-wing groups that spent $500,000, $600,000 on behalf of democracy dollars had more than enough time and resources to engage in the creation. And of course, they were way over any limits, but the Measure Finance Committee was no obstacle to them. However, some citizens, individuals who wanted to spend some money on an issue, whether it's a pretty major city issues like democracy dollars or something else, all of those cost a lot of time, a lot of resources. You have to have a pretty strong legal knowledge of where these laws are and what needs to be done, and dotting your I's, crossing your T's. Very onerous, very unfair. And yeah, it really comes down to, I think, how do they keep average citizens out of the political process? And there's no question that they do. And that's really one of the bases for challenging these laws in a legal context, is that they are either designed or with the side effect of pushing people out of the political process. So it's very important stuff. And, folks, I will just say, Rio Grande Foundation does not take government money. We, in fact, hide your privacy. We give you privacy that the Rio Grande Foundation values very much, and the ability for folks to donate to causes like the Rio Grande Foundation without having their name on some list of donors that can be targeted by leftists or your employer or somebody else. All those things are very valuable to us, and we will defend them to the hilt, and are doing so in two different circumstances, in addition to the democracy dollars battle. So City of Santa Fe, ongoing. Secretary of State, stay tuned. And it's very important. It goes really back, the legal argument and justification. Just think about the NAACP and what they were up against with the state of Alabama in the 1950s, and the importance of keeping their donors private from the prying eyes of the state of Alabama. Very, very critical. I mean, life-saving stuff that we're talking about at that time. So,
yeah, it's an important issue. Godspeed to you. I would certainly like to see that $250 be raised, whatever, $1,000, $5,000, $10,000, something that's more reasonable, so that, when a handful of people to get together on to do political speech, they don't have this massive overhead involved.
You got it, and thank you for listening to this week's podcast. Make sure to get the latest edition of Tipping Point New Mexico by subscribing at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. You can post or comment on this and other episodes on Facebook and Twitter, and tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.